It's so fun hitting admit all and watching all the little boxes fill up. Everyone's showing up all at once.
Hello.
Welcome, everyone. We're so glad to have you here. So glad you can make it tonight. I'm Jared Jenish, programming librarian at the Howe Library. And also next to me, we have Megan Coleman.
Hey.
Now, who also does programs. And we're delighted to have you here. We're going to start with the virtual flower show, which is a 4-minute slideshow set to music of beautiful photographs of flowers by David Nelson. And then when that's done, we'll hand it over to Susan Edwards, who will spend about 45 minutes giving you a narrated tour of her gardens. When that's done, we'll open it up to question and answer. And because there are so many of us, I think the easiest way for that is to drop your questions into chat. And Megan and I will keep an eye on chat and pass them along to Susan.
My name is Dave Nelson. I'm a photojournalist currently doing work for a publisher called Greater Good Media. In these times, I think that's a good title. I am not an expert on flowers. I started my photography career and journalism career with sports photography, fast action things. Which can be beautiful, by the way, but not like flowers. And I relate my photographing flowers to the first time I met my wife. I didn't know her name either, but I knew she was beautiful. What you're going to really see is a stranger walking in paradise. And I really hope that the timing of this will definitely pick up some spirits. So I hope you really enjoy it.
And now we will turn it over to Susan Edwards, who, as many of you know, is the president of the Hanover Garden Club, and who will give us a bit of a tour of her spring gardens. Take it away, Susan.
I should introduce myself a little bit for those of you who don't know me. I am the current president of the Hanover Garden Club, so I have good backing, and that's where a lot of the people are from, I'm sure. I just want to introduce you a little bit to the Garden Club before we get to my garden, because I'll have a few unhappy people if I don't. The Hanover Garden Club was founded in 1936, and this is one of the garden beds that we planted last year. And I believe this is a photograph that David Nelson took.
Yes.
Very handy because it has a slide, it has a sign. And just a few details. We were established in 1936 with the purpose of promoting the knowledge and love of gardening, participating in civic improvement, promoting conservation and sustainability. And I have to say, our 200 plus members do a good job doing that. So on to my next slide, where we have a picture of the greenhouse. This is a brand new greenhouse. It really got finished. Well, I guess we're almost finished, but pretty much finished last year. It's where we held our annual plant sale last year, and we'll be doing the same thing this year. The perennial plant sale will be held at the old greenhouse down in the Pine Knoll Cemetery area. In spite of COVID, we've managed to do most of the things we usually do. We had to do the plant sales sort of remotely, but we were able to use the greenhouse and socially distance. We've had monthly programs, and we did all the town garden plantings. And those of you who travel Hanover's Main Street and the immediate surrounds will have seen them. They were absolutely gorgeous this year. So we were very happy with them. I need a drink. This is actually our 85th year. And if it hadn't, if we weren't in sort of seclusion, we'd be having a big party. So our hope is that we'll have one later this year. And if not, we'll celebrate our 86th year next year. A few things we didn't get to do this year, such as the holiday sale, but we did have several open gardens, and that was a treat because we were able to go and visit people's gardens, socially distance, wear masks, but get out and see friends, if only from a distance. So with that being said, I'm going to move to my garden. And seeing as my husband's sitting behind me, I better say our garden, since he is quite a part of it too. This is obviously not today. Looking at that view today, there was a covering of snow, fresh snow over the old snow. But if we go to my next slide, I have a slightly fuzzy picture of pink pussy willows that were taken on 2/28, not necessarily this year. Now, let me just tell you a little bit about the photographs. Many of them are taken by me with my iPhone, and you'll be able to tell the ones that are less than perfect. Many of the others that are just spectacular were taken by Jim Block. And my daughter Julie gave me a gift a couple of years ago where she had Jim take photographs of my garden for a whole year. And I have some spectacular photos as a result of that. So thanks to Julie and Jim, some of these photographs, you'll be able to tell the difference. Jared thought this was a little fuzzy. And I said, well, it's the only one I've got, so it's going in. And then I have another picture of witch hazel, also taken at the end of February a couple of years ago. A little fuzzy, but it's a gorgeous color and nowhere near in bloom this year, although I have a yellow one that is. So that's it for February and into March. A poor solitary little crocus, again, a little fuzzy, but getting the angles right when you're got creaky knees can be a little challenging. But anyway, I can't tell you how exciting it was to see that yellow crocus. Yesterday, I did find some snowdrops, and I know that the internet locally has been buzzing with all the little snowdrop pictures. Some purple crocus a couple of days later, a clump of snowdrops. I love snowdrops. They come up through, I don't know, piles of, rubbish, it seems like, and just flower away, and they can get snowed on, and they just still continue to flower. And for those of you who have snowdrops, if you've never tried it, take off the little green sort of seed head that it puts out at the end of its blooming and toss them places, and you'll get a whole crop more snowdrops. Not the next year, but eventually. Put pink pussy willow. This is an amazing pussy willow. I got it in a little 2-inch pot at a gardening show a few years ago and planted it in a safe space where it wouldn't get overwhelmed. And I can see it from the kitchen window. So it's really a delight to be able to look out at this time of the year and see these pink fuzzies. And it's a good month ahead of the regular pussy willow. There's the witch hazel. I've got one that looks like that right now outside. This was the beginning of April, so we're through March. I'm sure I've had more flowers in March, but they're the ones I've got pictures of. This is one of the other witch hazels. It's a strange plant, but I love the flowers, and they have gorgeous leaves that turn a beautiful color in the fall. That's an orange witch hazel. And now a whole crop of crocus. I think the day I took that was like the day after the snow left, and suddenly pew, the crocus were there. And that's the pussy willow. So we're well into April before this pussy willow is in full bloom. This is a plant that we've had for many, many years, and it always sort of showed the difference between the pessimist, my husband, and the optimist, me. We would back out of the driveway and he'd be going, winter's going on forever. And I'd be saying, look, the pussy willow is coming out. So it was always one of those plants that struck me as interesting. This is winter aconite, another bulb. And I think that is just a gorgeous little plant. More snowdrops. At this time of the year, you can see all the wood chips that I use as mulch around the garden. By the fall, you can't see a wood chip because they're covered by plants. More crocus. I had a very nice young neighbor walk down the road one day and asked me if I had to plant these every year. He was not familiar with crocus, so I told him, no, I don't. I think we planted these when Julie was little, and she's not little anymore. So that's good 40 years ago. We've been in this house for many, many years, 48, is that? 48 years. So there's been quite a few changes, but these are some of the original. And more. I used to have a lot of yellow ones, but I think they're the ones that the chipmunks seem to go for first. They sit there and eat, they dig down, dig up the bulb and sit and eat them like they're eating an apple right in front of you. And trillium. I have a lot of trillium, and it seems to spread, not sure how. I assume the birds have a lot to do with it, but I started with 3 or 4 of the white trillium, and now I've got it all over the place. And the vinca, which is the purple flower, I have lots of that too, and I love it. It's a beautiful spring flower. Primrose. I was given this primrose when I had a knee replacement 20 years ago. I managed to keep it alive until it was time to plant it, and now I've got several clumps of it. It's beautiful. Daffodils. Guess you're all familiar with those. This was a shot I took of some of my visiting friends. They are regulars. I garden knowing that they'll be coming by. And the reason I still have crocus is because I sprinkle the crocus with malorganite when they first start coming up. Otherwise, the deer crop those. They don't eat the daffodils and the hyacinths, but they do eat the crocus and tulips. I don't have many tulips. Hello, what happened? More vinca, red epimedium. I don't know. I did not know epimedium until a few years ago. And I think it was Liz Krieg at one of our garden club programs who said it was one of her favorite ground covers. And I've been picking up little pieces of it from garden club sales ever since. And I have to admit, it makes a wonderful ground cover. And this is this is a red one. Virginia bluebells and the red trillium. Again, I think the birds brought the red trillium and Bill Young gave me the Virginia bluebells. And one of my favorites, hellebores. When we first moved here, I think we were still zone 3, which meant hellebores were not practical. But having seen some at my cousin's house in England, I was just, it was like, oh, I've got to grow these. And so I came back and bought a couple of plants and they did beautifully. So I expanded my stock by getting about 15 bare root, which were much less expensive from one of the nursery, one of the catalogs. And they have done beautifully. So hellebores come up. They'll bounce out of the ground the minute the snow's gone, and they don't seem to mind when the snow falls on top of them all over again. I mean, we're looking at the end of April here, but still got snow occasionally. Hyacinths, tulips, daffodils, and more daffodils. I think once upon a time I planted about 10 daffodils. And 20 odd years later, they were beginning to reach the point where they weren't blooming. So I decided I'd better dig them up and move them. I think I ended up planting about 200 daffodil bulbs that fall. It was a lengthy process. They multiply. Pink corydalis, also which grows from a little bulb. And it's an interesting plant because it disappears come summer. It'll just sort of melt away. So all the other stuff that grows doesn't bother it at all because it's disappeared. And I have a magnolia that's just coming into bloom now. One of the little blue bulbs, of which I've got way too many, Glory in the Snow is that one. This is some pulmonaria I actually potted up for the plant sale. So those are actually little baby plants waiting to be taken to the plant sale. There's a forsythia or forsythia bush, depending on how you say it. I stake up my daffodil leaves because there's too many of them to just flop over on all the other plants. And I often use the forsythia water sprouts as stakes, and they usually root. So then I'll plant those elsewhere. So that's a transplant from my original forsythia. Andromeda. If you live on the West Coast, you get the most gorgeous Pieris japonicas, and the new growth comes out crimson. And then you've got the flowers. It's just spectacular, but we don't get the red on the leaves. By the time the quince is beginning to bloom, it's time to put the, start getting your hummingbird feeders out, but look for the orioles. They're about to arrive. The quince is original to the lot I live on. It's not, we don't live in a large area. We have less than half an acre, but I do kind of garden beyond the edges. So not everywhere, not all of these are actually in my garden. And then comes May, and now everything is beginning to burst out of the ground. This is bloodroot, and I just love this plant. Jim had to come back during the day to take this because they open up in the sun, and he tended to come at the crack of dawn when they weren't open. And there's a spread of them. They do spread readily. I mean, it's not like I've planted all these just have spread. Trillium. I'm often asked if I fertilize my plants, and in theory, I don't. The only thing I use is a lot of mulch and compost that I make. But in the spring, I do use malorganite around the bulbs and around the trillium, otherwise the deer eat it. And I suppose that is a fertilizer. So they grow to be absolutely humongous. More glory of the snow, glory in the snow. Striped squill. And I don't know if that's glory in the snow or Scylla, but it's one of the blue flowers. But the striped squill is like a little petite hyacinth. And then the hellebores are growing. They are getting bigger and bigger, and they bloom for ages. And actually the white and the red or the purpley that you can see, that's not actually a petal. So it doesn't fall off and it just gets older. So the white will turn sort of greenish as the year goes by. In this climate, you need to cut most of the evergreen leaves back in the spring before the flowers come out, and then they'll put up these new leaves and you'll have a big evergreen clump for the summer. Primulas, these are some of the drumstick primulas. My husband particularly likes these, so I'm supposed to be expanding my selection. They don't seem to spread quite as rapidly as some of the other things, but we're getting there. That has to be a Jim photo for sure. Tete-a-tete daffodils. These were being tossed out from our church once because they'd gone kind of, and nobody wanted them, so they got planted, and they're just lovely. They're just so petite. Hellebores, and now you can see the ground's not bare anymore. There's tons of bulbs around them. More of the striped squill, more of the hellebores, one of my favorite pictures, and I think a lot of you got that one in the notice. More periwinkle or vinca. A lot of people hate this because it does spread, but I've got so many hilly areas and shady areas and areas I want ground cover that I like it. This is one of the sedums. This is not its flower, it's just its color. And in the spring, it's fun to see the yellowness of it appearing. Here's another striped squill, and the heuchera behind it is in full leaf now. They're looking a little shabby at the moment outside, but you can see new growth coming. More daffodils. There's another picture of the pink corydalis. There is a yellow version that you get in the summer, and growing up in England, we were very familiar with it. It grew in all the walls and in corners. And there's a blue one that I don't have. Here's the red epimedium. More hyacinths. It's nice that the deer don't eat these because I don't have to worry about them. Drumstick primulas back, and that's what the actual flower of the hellebore looks like. It's just so pretty. It's got some daffodils. This is a pink epimedium. Oh, every time somebody new comes in, I have to switch how I move. There's more of the red trillium. This is one of the plants that gets to be absolutely amazing, amazingly large. A daffodil, in case you needed that explaining. Virginia bluebells. These are so fascinating in the way they can be pink and blue in the same little clump of flowers. The leaves on these get pretty straw colored as the season progresses, and I tend to just pull them out because they get to look pretty ugly. And if I pull up the bulb, I just plant it somewhere else. That's another forsythia bush that I planted from cuttings. And there's one of the gorgeous blooming bits. For some reason, my smaller bushes bloom better than the big one. That's actually on the race school hill. I just can see it from back windows, so it's nice to be able to look at flowers. So white epimedium. And we are into May. We started May with the bloodroot. As one of the PJM rhododendrons. Some years the deer eat all the buds. This year, well, actually, for the last few years, I've surrounded it with netting for the winter. So we've generally had a flowering season. And these tulips are actually growing behind the netting, so they survived. This is a Ricky magnolia. I have a Merrill magnolia, which is a white one, but I don't appear to have any photographs of it. This pink one flowers later and usually avoids all the problems of frost. So it's a very pretty plant, and it's really growing quite quickly. More trillium, and now the ferns are up, which means we've probably already been eating fiddlehead ferns. The rhubarb and the asparagus I have no pictures of, but we eat those around this time. This is a clump of double bloodroot, and this appeared like magic. I have no idea where it came from, but it gets bigger every year, and it's just gorgeous. And here's a fritillaria, also recent arrival. I think we found that, was that last year? Mm-hmm. And I mean, I was familiar with the plant. I just had never planted any, so I was somewhat surprised to find it outside the front door. Candy tuft. This grows beautifully, and it's only just coming into bloom. It'll be a massive white shortly. Dutchman's breeches. Those are, it's one of the dicentra plants. Crested iris, these came from a friend and are just petite. They're only about 2 inches tall and just gorgeous. Lamium, one of the spreading ground covers. And here are some maidenhair fronds appearing. I think these actually came from the Garden Club sale one year. And because we hold the sale we used to hold it mid-May, there were no fronds appearing. So it looked like we were trying to sell a lump of dirt. So I have to admit, nobody bought it. So it came home, and it's a gorgeous plant. Here's a yellow epimedium. And that's the leaf of it. This one has a sort of bronzy leaf. More trillium. Pink hellebores, red trillium, more hellebores. Depending where you go in the garden, they're all over the place. So most of the early spring stuff is around the upper level, close to the house. And this is a primrose we've had for many, many, many years. And it's such a cheerful little spring plant. It gets pretty ugly leaves, but it gets covered by all the other plants in the summer and doesn't seem to care, so we don't have to look at them. But the flowers in the spring are beautiful. And this is one of Jim's pictures of a wren building its nest. We have an incredible amount of wildlife in the backyard, and this is just one of them. And a black and white warbler passing through. I won't subject you to some of the pictures I've taken of birds because they're less than great. Here's a magnolia, here's the primulas with the magnolia and iris growing beyond, and Solomon seal. The deer like this, and some years they'll find it and crop it, and other years they'll just leave it alone. It's a sort of hit and miss, but it's a really pretty plant. And here it is hiding amongst the other plants that are growing up. I think most of this is snake root and fern. Here's a perennial alyssum or basket of gold. We are mid-May now. And columbines. I've got some beautiful, almost black columbines, but every time I take a picture of them, you can't see them. It's too dark. So crab apples. When we first moved here, I don't think there was a crab apple in the area. Now there's dozens of them, and they are beautiful, and they came all by themselves. They walked here from somewhere. Oops. Needless to say, we have a lot of visiting birds. The cedar waxwings and the robins spend a lot of time in the crabapple trees in the late winter. This is the yellow corydalis as opposed to the pink one, and this does not grow from a bulb. In fact, it's probably not even a perennial here. It self-seeds, but it self-seeds readily. There's a Japanese painted fern. I love the texture of that, and I love the way it blends in with everything else. I'm big into texture and different colored plants. One of the tulips, creeping phlox, and the reason it's called creeping is obvious if you own it, because it sure does. I would take over the entire patio if we didn't pull it back. And the deer know exactly where it is. It can be completely covered with snow, and they'll burrow down and they'll eat it almost down to the roots, but it just bounces back in the spring. This is a particularly lovely epimedium that's orange. Grape hyacinths, the white bleeding heart, more Dutchman's breeches. This is a sort of shorter version of the big bleeding hearts. And then down in the lower garden, we're looking at, we're looking at late spring. The iris are out, the candelabra primulas, and the grass is green, and the mowing is driving my husband crazy by this point. So pansies, they pop out all over the place and they just come back happily. Allium are virtually everywhere, and you'll see more of them as we go along. Other plants, you can see there's not too much bare ground showing by now. I think that these allium are almost exclusively in a bed of astilbe and the leftover leaves of the daffodils. As the allium begin to pass by, they still look gorgeous, but I have to admit, I don't usually leave them standing for too long, otherwise I end up with too many babies. This is called Doronicum, or leopard's bane, which I think is not a particularly nice name, but we've always called it sunshine on a stick. That was Julie's name for it when she was little, and it stuck. And I truthfully have to keep replacing this because the deer like it as well, and it disappears some years. I seem to have a lot of wild lily of the valley. This is this little stuff over on the right. It spreads like crazy, but doesn't seem to get in the way of plants growing. And now the quince is in full bloom, and you can pretty well guarantee that the hummingbirds are here. And for the first time ever, I actually had quince this year. I don't know what normally eats them, but I got quince. Here's more creeping phlox in a different color. And then this is a little thug. It is one of the primulas, Kisoana. It's a Japanese primula. It's got this amazing pink flower and it spreads like crazy, but it's easy to pull up and transplant. But one can go a long way. You don't need to be given a dozen. You just need one. And within a few days, few years, you could be giving it away by the dozen. More of the Japanese painted fern. You can see what I mean about the difference in textures and colors. There's the ginger in the lower left. There's a dark heuchera at the back, and there's some masterwort, I think, in the upper left. Here's a starflower we found over on the race school hill one day. First time I'd seen that over there. This is the color the white trillium go as they fade during the summer. I have some white epimedium that blooms much later in the lower part of the garden. And here's the maidenhair fern unfurled. And I've got a picture at the end where it's the darker green of summer. So here's another ground cover that's called Green and Gold. I have it planted under one of my favorite trees. Its proper name is Chrysogonum virginium. And a friend brought this on 2 trays once, and I've managed to spread it around the garden quite liberally. It's very cheerful. And this is called foam flower or tiarella, loves shade, spreads like strawberries. And I think I had 3 plants once, and now I've got a hillside of them. Ajuga does the same thing, but I try and keep it out of the garden, and it's planted liberally in the adjacent swampy area. Here's a thalictrum that appeared one year like magic. I have plenty of the very tall meadow rue that's about 10 foot tall, and flowers later in the summer, but this one, I don't know where it came from. It's much shorter, but blooms early and is a pretty little plant. And then we get to Amsonia, which is such a gorgeous blue. I love it. Troilus or globe flower. I would have called it a buttercup, but that's apparently what it's called. Dutchman's breeches. If any of you, by the way, have knowledge of names of plants that I've misnamed, please let me know that. Now it's the time for the azaleas to start blooming if you haven't bloomed already. Oops. Onto the heuchera. I've got quite a bit of this, and I think this was once a dark purple, but the babies come out all sorts of different colors. Creeping dicentra or creeping bleeding heart, and this just pops up all over the place, but is easy to remove if you don't want it. And the candelabra primroses are amazing. They love my wet lower garden. We're heading into the swamp, which is adjacent to our lot right here. And it truly is a magical place. The whole neighborhood walks through here on their way to the race school. And there'll be an email goes out to say, check out the swamp, because it's just gorgeous when it's in full bloom. This is another of the heuchera. This is a lime marmalade, a yellow azalea, Teresa bugnet. This is a shrub rose. When we first moved into this house, Julie was about 2.5 and she wanted her own plant. So we invested in a peony, which was her choice. And when Joanne came along, she felt outdone. So she wanted a rose. And so this is Joanne's rose. Candelabra primroses again. Lots and lots of sedum. I love the sedum because it fills in all the ugly corners. I have a big Van Hoot spirea with a lot of azaleas in front of it, so it forms a very nice backdrop. More of the allium. That's got a gym look about it. This is a pretty creeping phlox. It's called peppermint stick, and this also came from a friend. This is one of the Jack in the Pulpits about to unfurl, or is unfurling. And here's its open. I won't say furled, it's open. There's the yellow primrose, but the woodland phlox I've got growing adjacent, and that is an incredibly aromatic plant. So it's right next to one of my chairs. And not a particularly good photo, but it's a lady's slipper. So I don't know whether it will have survived the winter, but it was definitely fun to see it grow and flower. A friend had grown that from seed. There's that sunshine on a stick again. A big clump of bleeding heart that grows where right now there's probably a 6-foot heap of snow. A third of the snow from our house lands right where that bleeding heart is right now. But as soon as the snow's gone, it bounces into life and is a delight to look at. Lots of columbines or equilegias. Lots of candelabra primroses, pansies, snow in summer. I'm almost done. I'll hurry. Iris, very out of focus, I apologize. More azalea, wagila, more sedum, irises, big iris, salvia, lilacs. I never managed to take a photograph of my lilac trees before they turned brown. These were some I gave to the church for a Sunday morning service, so I took a picture. Rhododendron, Korean lilac, very aromatic. Whoops, sorry. It's right by the front door, so we get to enjoy that immensely. More azalea, more columbines. The odd poppy that stalk is always never straight. Rhododendron, a very bright azalea. We rescued this from a neighboring house that was cutting everything down. And my favorite tree, the fringe tree. This was early in its life. It's gotten quite a bit bigger. It's got a lot of ground cover around it now. And there it is with its bloom. It's fascinating. And it's a native, so it's a good one to have. There's one of our first strawberries, the Van Hoot spirea, more azalea, columbines. Heuchera, this is a very purple one. It reminds me of the color of one of my daughter's cars once upon a time. Another thalictrum that came out of nowhere. The annuals got planted about June 2nd. Whoops. So there they are. There's my garden angel. She's getting buried by plants. Whoops. And there we have a visitor. And another, needless to say, I took this through the window. Back there checking out hummingbird feeder. Coral bells, peony. This is Julie's peony. Looking gorgeous with the rain on it. Jack in the Pulpit, more columbine. Valerian, sedum, and if anybody knows the name of this, please let me know. It's probably in the pinks family, but I'm not sure. And this is a campanula that I grew up calling Canterbury bells, so that's what I'm calling them. Early June. And Sweet Williams, I'll run through these, but those of you who know me know that Sweet Williams are something I've had forever. Doesn't seem to matter what I do, they won't go away. They are gorgeous. Lots of astilbe, lady's mantle, Stelladoro lilies if the deer don't eat them. Foxgloves, this is on the race school hill, so we look at these. That's in the garden somewhere. It's just a fantastic plant. We grew up calling those thimbles. I don't know what you call them. There's a white one. A rather out of focus black lace elderberry bloom, but this is a very pretty plant too. One of my grandchildren's gifts over the years, a Husker red penstemon or penstemon, and that's a couple of weeks later or a day or so later, full bloom and out of focus. Rogesia, cranesbill, I'm almost done. Primrose and woodland phlox, mountain laurel, pinks, giant fleece flower known as hide your neighbor plant. Froggy, also a grandchild gift, and a heron that came all the way from England with me, slung over my shoulder. We have a lot of Diablo 9-bark or Physocarpus, and it's a very colorful tree. Deutzia, which is a little ground cover shrub. And there's the maidenhair fern. Whoops. And spirea is just coming into full bloom. And this I try and keep out of the garden too, because it spreads so much, but it makes a good hedge to define paths. And then a couple of pictures of plants, whoops, that I pot up for the plant sale. So every year I pot up about 200 plants to give away. I seem to have a very productive garden. So,
Susan, thank you. That was wonderful. As I was watching, the wind was howling around my house, and it was just so wonderful to be able to escape into a completely different world for a little while.
well, it is, and I can't say how wonderful it's been in this year of confinement to be able to escape outside.
Now we'll open up to any questions you might have. If you would just drop them in chat. There were a few earlier on. Let me go back and take a look at them.
I saw someone was asking about Melogonite, the fertilizer that I used to. Am I muted?
No, we can hear you, Susan.
Oh, you could hear me. Okay. It's a sewage sludge from Milwaukee. It comes in a big 17-pound bag or 16-pound bag. It's a big bag anyway. And it's very fine pellets. And I just sprinkle it wherever I have things I don't want the deer to eat when the plant is small. It doesn't work once they get tall, but it does work around the small stuff. We do have a lot of deer, and they don't seem to mind coming right up to the front door.
Where do you get it, Susan?
West Lebanon Supply.
Okay.
Can you spell it?
I think Longacres or whatever. Whether it's from Milwaukee, and some people say don't use it on vegetables, which I don't, because it is a sewage sludge. It's made from sewage, so it's useful. But anyway, I can only assume that the reason some of my trillium gets so big is because it gets a liberal Melogonite. Thank you, Julie, for putting the spelling in there. I need my family around me. So any other questions I can answer? Where did I get my trillium? I saw was somebody's question. And actually the original trillium I had came from a neighbor who had dug them up, probably 30 plus years ago when Mink Brook was being cleaned out for some reason, and they were digging them, they were destroying some of the habitat. And she gave me the runts. And my runts have done beautifully. And my hellebores, I bought the first two at what was then Longacres, and the others came from one of the catalogs. I don't know, truthfully, I don't know which one. But I'm currently getting a lot of catalogs that have got hellebores in them. Plant Delight, is it Plant Delight Nursery has a lot. But I haven't bought any in years, and truthfully, they're now putting out babies, so I'm spreading them around, digging them up and spreading them around, although they don't apparently come true to form. But I'm good with babies. They seem to grow well. I have quite a lot of paving stones that I put down for paths and a patio, and they're set in builder's sand, juck sand. And boy, is that an amazing place for seedlings to grow. I mean, every year I'm digging out heuchera and astilbes, and you know, they're little, but they grow well.
Susan, we have
There's
another.
quite a few people trying to join, thinking it's now 4 o'clock.
Susan, we have another question. Someone is asking if the candelabra primulas have leaves that turn unsightly like the other primulas.
No, not really. Although they don't like very hot sun and dryness, because then they'll go limp. But they love the wet feet down in my lower garden, where we are literally at the groundwater is pretty much at the level of the garden. So most of my beds there are raised, but they're growing in the stream bed. There's a vernal stream, and they literally are growing in the stream bed.
And someone else is asking about how you keep all of your plants upright. Do you do a lot of staking?
Well, over the years, I've invested in stakes. You know, they're not cheap. That's the problem. But yeah, some. But in the upper garden, I don't need to. In the lower garden, which it's like a microclimate, it's sort of between 2 hills and very swampy in the bottom, and things tend to want to grow tall. So yeah, I do stake some things. Is that a daughter?
Well,
I see a daughter. Where she came from.
Susan, I just think it's amazing how much you fit into your space there. How
I
many
know.
flowers and the variety. It's very impressive.
It really is not a big space.
I know.
And, you know, I'm pie-shaped. The front is quite small and it spreads out. And then, of course, I encroach. There's a town lot adjacent, which I pretty much garden in. And then there's the race school hill that comes down to the stream that I have. We don't mow it, but we do plant over there. They consider it mine. It's very nice of them. We do ask permission, but it's a pretty special area, and there's so many young kids around that seem to enjoy it too. But yes, I mean, as I age, I am using more shrubs, and I get rid of things that don't turn me on. It's like, there's no point. You're gone. So, and having a garden club, I can always donate. You know, I can't bear to just throw things out. So they get potted and given away.
thank you so much for being here. And David and Susan, thank you so much for sharing the beauty of your flower photographs and your gardens with us. It was just such a pleasure to be involved in this and to put this together with you. So thank you both so much. And thank you all for coming, and have a good evening. And we'll hope to see you again soon.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So some of you stay there so I can say hello.